Hey, what's going on, people? You're watching That Christian Podcast on TLDTV. We're joined today for in-depth, deep discussion with our panel about distance from God. This is something that many people have struggled with. This is also something that some people never make it back from. I just want to open up to the floor. I'll be the first to admit it if no one else wants to. There's been times when I felt more distant from God than others. Anyone else ever gone through this season?
Yeah.
All right, so let's try and pinpoint this then. So at the start, we put out Romans 8:38. Romans 8 and then verse 38, which essentially the gist of it is that there's nothing that can separate us from the love of God. So what is it, people? What is it that makes us at times feel more distant from God?
Oh, I think it's the individual experiences. Like for me, I grew up Christian, you know, went to church every Sunday, was even teaching Sunday school, and went to uni, couldn't find a church that I liked, but I didn't feel distant from God at that point. When I felt it was just over 2 years ago, my dad passed away, and it was dealing with grief and that, like, why could this happen? Like, it was honestly, it was really, really tough. And so that's when I felt far from God. But that's also the thing that brought me closer to God. Like when I was able to realize that the strength that my family needed to get through the grief was literally by the grace of God. And just doing certain things like a Daniel fast and speaking to other believers, it brought me back, and it brought me back stronger. Like it brought me to a point where I needed, and I realized that it wasn't that God had left, it's that I had left. I don't know if you guys have felt that way.
Yeah.
I have to agree with you on when things are really tough, like grief and pain, and those are the moments that kind of, in my experience, often go one of two ways, where you're like, how could God do this to me? And like, I can't believe this has happened. Why God's a loving God? Why is he doing that to me? Or, oh my word, I can't get through this by myself and I need Jesus. And I think for myself, I've definitely experienced both of them. And the times when I've gone, I can't do this, I need Jesus, are the times when I've been able to get through that pain a lot smoother, because there's some kind of supernaturalness, that peace that's promised in the Bible, that peace beyond understanding, which helps, I think, from that distance. But it's so easy to go, oh gosh, no, God wasn't there when I needed him, so I'm just going to go.
Yeah, to jump onto that point, like it seems like all three of us, is like pain is kind of like the catalyst. And like for me, like I got really close to my faith and God when I broke up with my ex. It kind of sounds a bit cliche, but like I was down because I you know, when it was my first relationship and I did everything I could for her. Like I felt like my type of loving was like, I'll give you everything. Like, don't mind me, I'll give you everything I've got. Not money wise, but like emotionally, you know, speaking. And
been there, brother.
And then she just cut it off, and I was just left there like in the rain. It was a nightmare. And for like the first 2 weeks, I felt like there was no point. Like, what was the point of continuing? Literally, like there was no point of it. But like, I remember like, cause prior to it, like, my friends would used to like give me like they would used to do evangelical missions with me and like try and get me to convert to the church that I'm currently in. And I just remembered that. So then I started hitting them up, and the more I knew it, like I was the one wanting to connect to God more. And I found peace with it. It was amazing. And now I'm a convert of 3 years to the church now, and I'm blessed. don't know if anybody else had any experience with that. Like from rock bottom, all you can go is up, man. That's it.
Yeah.
That's like, what was I supposed to do?
I actually find the opposite sometimes, where I find when things are bad, I'm pretty good at going to, to the right place. Say, right, I need Jesus now. This is the time. I need God, And I grew up with a dad who's got a really strong faith, and he would quite often, right, it's time to go on a walk. I'm like, oh God, here we go, and it would be those chats, and it would be a really good thing for that to help me, get closer. Whereas when things are going great, I'm often caught saying, well, I'm amazing, rather than thanking God for that. I find actually that when things are going as smooth as possible is when I'm furthest away. Yeah,
I relate to that so much, man. My biggest just like way I get distant from God is just busyness.
Yeah.
Distracting myself with work. Like I have periods of my line of work. I'm an actor, so I have periods which are insanely busy. And then when that happens, like it's so easy to be like, oh great, everything's going my way. It's brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And instead of stopping and being like, actually, I'm so grateful to God for this opportunity and for this success that's currently on me, in full knowledge that this could deteriorate like that. So I'm really, and so I completely relate. So if I'm busy, it's so much harder to carve out that time to press into Jesus, to carve out that time to grow in my faith. Whereas if everything's falling apart, then I go, what, Jesus, help. And yeah, so I totally 100% feel what you're saying, Nathan.
Just wondering, how do you guys define your distance or closeness with God? What makes you know that you're close or not? Because personally, there was a time in my life before I gave my life to Christ and before I got saved, quote unquote, I felt that I was close to God. I felt, this and this. And then I rededicated my life. I got baptized and everything. And I was like, okay, I'm so close to God. I'm on fire for God and everything like that. But then I felt like I had some church culture issues. And I'm not sure if you know what I mean by that, but I just felt like the church at the time was just very religious, very legalistic. And I thought I was growing. I thought I don't think I thought there was anybody else that could be closer to God than I was. Like, I was like, yeah, I'm this, I'm that, I'm this, I'm that. And then, no, I'm not joking. Like, when I look back,
Moses.
He was this. I'm the one.
But I mean, now I've stepped out of that church, and I'm kind of in a place where, if I'm being honest with you guys, I would say I'm completely distant from God. And I'm happy that I can see scriptures like that says, there's nothing in God's creation that can separate us from his love. So I feel like, okay, I can be rest assured in that. But then what does that distance mean? Like, how are you describing your distance? Would you say that you are still, a Christian and on fire for God and saved and this or that? Or are you like, or in your moments of distance, however you would define that? And I'm really curious to hear how you define distance from him.
One thing I think of in that is I often look at Ecclesiastes, verse 3, chapter 3, I believe, verse 3 even, which is, there is a time for everything under the sun. And it goes on to list quite literally everything. And as part of that is a time for essentially being on fire and in it, and a time for rest. But it's really tricky sometimes in that time of rest to just cast God aside completely, where as you're saying, and I've been there, I've had some terrible church experiences that is, I think that can be a barrier. Church is absolutely a brilliant thing, but sometimes you can be in the wrong church for you, or if you feel like there's poor leadership, or you surround yourself in the wrong circles, that can be detrimental. So as you said, you feel like you're on fire, but you may not be, or you feel like, well, I'm doing all the right steps, but I'm not. And and I think the way I combat that is I try and have my faith completely personal to me and steps I take, rather than relying on church and other things. And that if I'm so as you can see behind me, music is a big part of my life, and if I'm not singing worship songs every day or writing worship songs or whatever, then that's okay. There's other things I can do. there is a time for that where, do you know what, I need a bit of rest from humans. And I have a saying which might be controversial, but I don't really mind saying that, is Christians are the very best of people, but they can also be the very worst. And that's something that's really got me down before. Something that really affected my relationship with God was falling out with the church. I think it's something quite a lot of people have felt, and I think it then falls upon your shoulders to say, well, it's my time to look what is my relationship with God that's not based on other people. It's what am I personally doing. And that can become routine too, and it's a constant battle, I find, getting the balance right. But self-evaluation is really important, and that's something I learned growing up in the church. Is you've got to keep looking at yourself and reflecting. And I have on my birthday every year. Well, it's changed to my anniversary now because I'm a team with my wife. We look back at the previous year where we were in certain various stages of life. The year where we are right now, so it might be church, work, hobbies, blah blah blah, work, friendships, family, and then we look at where do we want to be next year. And so we have 3 separate notes pages on our phones. That is really helpful to come back and say, well, actually, that's something I haven't even been focusing on, but it's something I wanted to a year ago, and it's a really good thing. And doing that sort of framework for me with my faith has been really helpful. Because sometimes I just need a bit of prompting, and but that can't really come from anyone other than yourself at the end of the day, as much as church can be useful. And sometimes I hope there are the right people that are around that, but I think it's really important to be disciplined in yourself and try and find that. But that's not easy. I can't say that, and I'm not sitting here saying I've got all the answers, because I definitely have at times the furthest from God, and it doesn't feel okay. But you can only try and put things in place yourself, I find.
Yeah, I agree that actually you're spot on, Nathan, with the fact it's a personal thing, isn't it? What do we define distance as God from? It's a very personal thing. It's like, what is your distance? Is it based on a feeling? Is it based on how much time you're spending with Jesus? It's very different for everyone. But actually, on the kind of community aspect, I don't know if you guys have found this during coronavirus, because church hasn't been a physical thing, it's been online, that actually I've missed the accountability sometimes of having your Christian friends, whether they are in your church or whoever they are, of those. And there is a huge worth to having people that go, hey, how are you doing in your faith? And just, or people that you hang out with and you naturally just kind of talk about God and talk about how you're getting on with that. And so for me, that's a very helpful thing in trying to, especially when I'm feeling very distant, trying to come back to God. So there's absolutely worth in individualness. It all comes from what you're doing. But for me, a huge part of that is who's holding me accountable here to help me in this journey and walk with Christ.
So are you saying the accountability sort of helps you be closer?
Yeah, it helps me to make the decisions to spend more time with Jesus or to get closer to God. It's not the thing that makes me closer, but it helps to spark that off within me. Largely probably because I'm so busy.
It's a little prompt, isn't it? It's like the tap on the shoulder and saying, oh yeah, I should be doing that, and I think you're absolutely right. Church community, house groups, whoever, just friendships from the past that are Christian can be so helpful in that. Yeah, I completely agree.
For me, when I look at distance from God, what I kind of categorized it as was this feeling of a lack of joy in my life.
Oh.
And I'm probably going to get emotional now because I can feel it. So I will try not to, honestly, I can feel it coming in, but I just felt this lack of joy. Honestly, it just felt, I don't want to say bleak, but growing up, I've always been a person who has been really happy, really joyful, mostly kind-spirited, although I don't like rudeness, but and the kind of, no, I'm not going to act like I'm perfect, but but I'm the kind of person where I'm smiling when you see me on the street, you know what I mean? And, often when I would sow seeds, I would see the rewards or benefits, like just because I can't even explain, it was just that kind of relationship. And I just realized that there was just no joy Like there was no joy. Things just seemed like they were going from the frying pan into the fire. And I just realized that I wasn't making time for God, period. The Bible that I used to read, bruh, I don't know where it is. The Bible app hadn't seen me in if I'm being honest, I want to be very real with you guys, yeah?
100.
My Bible app
Yeah,
hadn't
man.
seen me in time, right? I wasn't going to church. I wasn't even doing my personal prayers. You know, like I was just desolate almost, just really just living of the world and just going through it by myself. And I'm trying to think of the moment when I realized what was missing. And I can't tell you what it was. I just think it was one of the nights where I was crying and I was literally like on my knees, like, Lord, this cannot be it. Like, and I think in that absolute moment is when I realized that was what was missing. So for me, it was just that missing. And, you know, God works in mysterious ways, because there were certain people that I had come in contact with, but I wasn't particularly close with, and they reached out to me because of the situation, and they were people that were Christian, and it would start a conversation there. Or I was on YouTube one day and I saw Daniel fast, and I was like, what's the Daniel fast? And I had literally just done like a whole Asda shop the day before. And I was like, I swear, I'd done Asda the day before. I saw this Daniel fast, saw this woman talking about breakthroughs and how it just transformed her life and her. And I was like, I'm doing it tomorrow.
What is the Daniel fast? I'm sorry.
Oh,
I didn't want to say anything about it. What is that?
Listen.
It sounds cool, but I need to know.
Listen, the Daniel fast. It is a transformational fast. So it's based on Daniel from the Bible. It's a 21-day fast where you give up sugar, meat. Just think of it as maybe extreme veganism, right? So everything you eat is from the earth, because for 3 weeks, Daniel did not eat any fancy food. So you literally are going through the same steps that Daniel took. Obviously, there are prayers that are associated with it. And it's almost like a rededicating of yourself to God. It's a refocusing. When I tell you the closeness that it drew, I can't recommend it enough. I've had like 3 or 4 friends do the Daniel fast. Like, if you are in a position in your life where you are looking for breakthroughs, or you're looking for extra encouragement in your relationship with God, like the Daniel fast. It's honestly, it's unreal. I cannot enough. But so through doing things like that, the joy started returning, and I just started realizing that, hold on, the joy had always been there, but because I was so wrapped up in that feeling of no joy, that I didn't notice the joy. So I think for me, it wasn't so much of the accountability. It was more, you guys were saying, like the personal kind of journey, and just taking a second to realize, like, hold on, you're feeling this. How do you want to feel? How do you like to feel? What do you see God as? Like, do you understand God's nature? And then taking the steps that I needed to take to get to where I am now, if that makes sense.
I mean, for me, I'm more on the really personally, I like kind of hold myself accountable on where I am with God. Like for the past year, because of Corona, very decent. Like just way in the back. Like I'm not as active as I once was, and that's how I kind of like gauged it. Like, because I was a convert, I was doing everything, activity to activity, like evangelizing. Like I was doing everything. I was hosting events for the church. I was doing everything I could just to get out there. But like, because of Corona, it kind of made me more lazy. And like, I won't admit it, but I know deep down in me, I know that I've like drawn myself away from God. Like, it's still there, but I'm not as close as I once was. And I think that's just it's just to do with how you personally feel in terms of where you think you are with God. So it's all down, for me anyways, is how I feel. And how I gauge it, if I'm close or I'm not. And right now, I just know deep down that I'm not as close as I once was. But I'm trying to get back to where I was.
So that's interesting. You bring up that, doing things in the church and things like that, and then feeling further away. Because sometimes I've actually felt that I've been doing so much that doing that has taken me away. Because if I feel like it becomes a job, I've had in worship, I've had jobs doing that, and sometimes I've had to really look at myself, or people say to me, "Come on, you're becoming professional Nathan, not God-loving Christian Nathan," and that can be equally hard, and I sometimes I look back and I think, oh, I was doing this, I was doing that, I was doing this, that, the other for so many people, blah blah blah, and that was great. But I look back and I think, I wasn't being, my relationship with God wasn't brilliant, even though I was in the right place at the right time, because I was focusing on what I was doing or what my team was doing or this, that, the other. And I think that can be the struggle. And that's why I come back to Ecclesiastes. Sometimes to get close to God, you have to take a step back. David, I always look at David in the Bible, because to me, he's a huge role model, not because he's perfect, because he messed up a lot, like a lot. I studied this when I did a theology course. And when you really read about David, my word, he did some terrible things and some things that were so far away from God. What he did every time, and what makes him such a great king and role model, was go, oh dear, I really, and he would withdraw, and I need to just take myself off to the mountains. Moses did the same thing, and just be with God.
And Jesus did the same thing.
Exactly. Jesus did the same thing. Is sometimes you've got to take yourself away, because you're getting all wrapped up in, in David's case, it was being a king, it was being the guy that killed Goliath. He was similar to what we were talking about last time. He was living on a reputation and doing his thing, and that in itself took his relationship further away. And I found that before as well. When you're up front, whether it's preaching, worship leading, whatever, even reading a prayer out in a service, sometimes you can get wrapped up in those things. Even youth work, I found you can get wrapped up in, because it's such a brilliant feeling doing youth work and watching those, those children or youth, young people getting closer to God. But you can get so wrapped up in that your relationship with God suffers. And so for me, that's why I think sometimes it's really important to withdraw, to not get wrapped up and merge the busyness of what we do in life with faith itself. I think that can sometimes be quite dangerous. And I think it could be quite dangerous to think, oh, I need to just do that to get close to God. And absolutely, sometimes that works, and sometimes that's brilliant. It is throwing yourself into service. But that's not always the answer. And to me, I find, as I said, withdrawing and really reflecting can be really helpful, personally.
Yeah. So on a practical level, how is it that you guys kind of do that, carve out that time, draw closer? So what is it that we do to get closer to God when we're feeling distant? I think I'd love to hear your guys' kind of top tips, as it were, or experiences.
For me, it's worship music. I love, I love listening to the lyrics. And sometimes I would deliberately put on someone like Casting Crowns, who are a bit more challenging with their lyrics when I need to hear it. And what I do is I will fall asleep with my headphones on. So even if I'm not actively worshiping at night, suddenly, I wake up and I'm hearing those words. And I just have even if it's a couple of minutes, because I think, busyness in life and not being able to go to church with coronavirus, et cetera, is such a huge barrier generally. And I think, I think most people would be foolish to admit that doesn't stop them from time to time, because I think most people in England, or America or wherever, living in this modern world, struggle with that. And so I find using any downtime I have possible, so I'll plug worship in, so in the morning before I'm, having my breakfast, getting up, I am worshiping. And sometimes it's just on and I think, right, it's my busy day, whatever, but I'm giving it the opportunity to be there. And that's something, I've put into a routine. That's what I do.
I've got a kind of similar routine, but it doesn't revolve around worship music. It's more around devotionals. So I've really become a lover of the Bible app and the different devotionals that they have. And the devotionals are, you name the subject, from anxiety to grief to troubles at work, this to fasting. Like, they have so many different topics. So what I like to do is read a devotional before I eat in the morning. I typically don't even eat in the morning. I end up eating at like 12, so I'll do a devotional anytime before 12, and then I'll do another one before I go to bed. And what I will do as well is once a week I'll do a 3 a.m. prayer, just as a kind of just to give it extra time, And I think for me, doing devotionals and reading scripture, it not only draws me closer to God, but it makes me a better person. And that's when I can tell that I'm actually living more like a Christian, if that makes sense. Because one thing is to read the Bible and to go to church, but how am I treating other people? How am I, do you know what I mean? Like, how do I deal with conflict? How am I dealing with the person on the street who might have had a bad day and might have just pushed me accidentally? Things like that. So when I know that I'm closer by doing these things, is that I know that my personality becomes a more of a pleasure to this world than a bitter stone in the world, if that makes sense. I keep saying if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Can I ask, Linda, do you find it to be more easily digested, the devotionals, rather than, say, a couple chapters out of the Bible?
Absolutely. And there's devotionals for different things. So right now I'm doing Psalms and Proverbs, and that's a little bit harder. It's a little bit on the heavier side, because every day we'll run through 6 different actual chapters. And that's a bit heavier than the normal devotional. So some of the devotionals I've done have been like maybe 5-day devotionals, or like even a 100-day devotional, but it will give you, I don't know, the theme or the information, and then it will give you specific verses that are linked, as opposed to the Psalms and Proverbs. So if there is someone who wants to get into scripture and doesn't quite know where to start, or because I'm not someone who can quote you scripture. That's never been my area of expertise. But devotionals really do make things easier, and just easier. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been interesting for me. I took a moment just to kind of digest, because I think the question that Ebbs asked was like the perfect question in there. I wanted to see if we could define it both for Ebb's perspective and a wider world perspective, and just listen to kind of what you all were saying. Would we be able to define it as spiritual malnourishment, essentially, that distance that we're talking about? So like, distance is malnourishment, and closeness is feeling spiritually nourished.
Yes.
See a couple of heads nodding. Nathan, your thoughts?
Yeah.
So that reminds me of something. There's a very old, I can't remember what the school's called. There's a very old school of thought that suggests that every thought you have that's not on God or worship is a sin. Now, I think that's very extreme and very harsh, and that was aimed at during a time of conversion to try and push people to just to follow the faith, full stop. But I think of that sometimes. I remind myself that actually, well, I don't necessarily agree with that, but how much am I thinking about God? In your personal thoughts, how much am I praying to myself? How much am I, doing those things? And I think you're right. Spiritual malnourishment comes. Yeah, I think it's a brilliant way to sum it up. Is you're not getting enough. Wherever that comes from, whatever personally you do, your church is helpful, whatever works for certain people, devotionals, worship, prayer, scripture, anything, you're not getting enough of said thing. And so, I often think it's quite useful. The way to think of it is, well, how much are you thinking about said thing, said whatever works for you? How much are you thinking about that? How much time are you putting towards that? In the, and what Linda said as well, how that affects your output. How are you being with other people? Are you being really short and snappy and not giving them any grace? Are you trying to show Jesus, being holy, being set apart? Are you showing that you're different to other people? Why are you different? Because I'm a Christian. Are you doing that? And if not, well, it comes back to, as you said, being malnourished in a sense. You're not getting enough of something.